Hello, my name is Michaela. I'm one of the program coordinators here at Minnesota Alliance with Youth. Today I'm going to be reviewing the remote hours verification process with you. I know that I touched briefly on this at kickoff. Seeing as you've now completed some hours, you have a little bit more of an understanding of what goes into your position and what will make sense for you and your site supervisor in order to create a remote hours verification process for your needs. When you're completing remote hours, you need to first decide on what activities you're planning on completing. Then you need to get that written pre-approval from your site supervisor. You follow that up by actually doing the activities that you are wanting to complete. After that, you need to have some sort of written process where you write a reflection or send information to your site supervisor that shows that you have completed the activities that you've done. And then that all gets added to your timesheet as the final step in this process. So in terms of deciding on activities, when your host site is fully remote, basically anything that has to do with your position can be done remotely. So whether that's meeting with students, attending meetings, having one-on-one check-ins with your site supervisor, completing data entry, whatever your position looks like, whatever things you can do remotely, you can do remotely. And then when your site is serving in person, when that is an option for you, the expectation is that that is where the majority of your hours are coming from. Remote hours should really be minimal when your host site is in person. However, occasionally you can do remote hours in that case scenario, especially during like school holidays where your site is closed for long chunks of time and you just don't want to fall significantly behind on your hours. So in those cases, the things you could do would potentially be reading training materials, reading the books that your students are going to be reading in order to support them with their essays or projects. You could be reviewing the Alliance training materials or spending time on the Google site. You do have 20 hours of Life After AmeriCorps that you can use at any point during your service term, but once you hit 20 hours, you cannot do more. And then, yeah, if you had any like lesson planning to do, obviously it's not quite lesson planning, but coordinating of your schedule for the week to pull students out of classes, any of those types of pieces, if you want to do those remotely, you potentially could be even when your site is in person. So for written pre-approval, you can kind of get that in multiple ways, but the important piece is there needs to be a paper trail before you do any activities remotely. If you are going to be reading a book, your written pre-approval should have the name of any of those books that you're going to be reading along with their author. Any trainings that you're going to be doing, like the name of the training should be very explicitly said that you can be doing that remotely. There should be like a time frame for when you can complete those hours. So whether this is something where it's like until we're back in person, these are all the things you can be doing, or it's hey, in the next couple of months, as you know, we're starting to have school holidays because it's December and whatnot. In the next couple of months, you can do this, and this remotely. And then in that pre-approval, there should also be something about how your supervisor is expecting to get feedback from you after you've completed those activities. The easiest thing to have is ask your supervisor to send you an email with all this information. That way it's easily findable in your inbox or in their inbox later if they need to look it up. It also is easily dated and is just very clear. Then you can complete the activities. There's nothing more on this because you know how to complete those activities. And there's such a variety of them that we can't tell you how to do that. But in terms of written verification and documentation, there are a lot of things that could count. You could be writing summaries of activities that you've completed in emails to your supervisor. You could be writing those summaries in a follow-up one-on-one Google Doc that is very clearly labeled in terms of like what you're adding to the document versus what your supervisor has added. You could be updating a spreadsheet. You could be writing your follow-up in your hours planner. You've got that daily log section where you could add more information all the way over to the right. If you have a product that you've completed in your time, like you can show, hey, I look at this, I can show you the data that I've entered, or I can show you the lesson plan that I created. That is also a valid way of showing that you've done the hours that you said you've done remotely. You need to be able to produce whatever this verification method is at the end of every time you've completed remote hours. So if you've had a full 8-hour day where you have done remote hours, at the end of that day, you should be sending that follow-up. Even if you know that for the next 5 days you are going to be doing remote hours, you can't wait until the 5th day. You need to do one every single day. So you need to keep that as a daily piece, just after any time you've done remote hours. Keep that in mind. Make sure that whatever system you are using, you and your supervisor have clearly agreed on what that is, and you all have access to both the written pre-approval and this verification process afterwards. Your supervisor should be reviewing this before they approve your timesheet if you have any remote hours on your timesheet. And members and supervisors may be required to provide this documentation to us in a case of an audit. And then in terms of adding it to the timesheet, for general tips, you should have the remote hours, the remote type of hours, so whether that's remote service, remote training, remote life after AmeriCorps, and then the short description of what the activities were. So for books, you should always write the name of the book and the author, as well as what chapters or pages you've read. For all training, whether you're on-site or remote, you need to give the title of the training. If there isn't really a title, you can describe what the training was that you were doing. If you've completed on-site and remote activities in the same day, you do not put the number of hours of each time spent in your description. So you can write something such as, and I've got an example here, on-site service activities and remote service hours, read chapters 1 through 5 of The Great Gatsby by F. Fitzgerald, and remote training hours, attended Alliance 103 training. So that's an example for you. If your site is fully remote, you're going to have a lot of remote hours in your timesheet, and I understand that can be a lot to figure out as you're writing descriptions. But do try to make sure that you're varying your language, and not every single day is just a copy pasted version of the same thing. You could use this as a way to highlight different things that you've done each day where you spent more of your time. But you shouldn't submit a timesheet where every single day's thing is the same if you have remote hours. All right, so I'm going to walk you through an example. And this example in particular is reading 1984, since your senior year students will be reading it after winter break. All right, so deciding on the activities. That's already been done. Reading 1984, since your senior year students will be reading it during their break. You're reading it after their break. All right, so written pre-approval. You can ask your supervisor to write you an email, and that email can look like something I've got written here of, hello, member, please read The Great Gatsby, 1984, and the things that carried over winter break or in the next couple of months in order to better support your focus list students with their English classes. When you've read chapters, please update your daily log with a summary of what you've read. So that's a very simple statement that they can send you. I know that when I served as a Promise Fellow in White Bear Lake, I surveyed all of the English teachers before winter break and asked them what they'd be reading for the remainder of the year, so that I could potentially read up to 5 or 6 books during my winter break. It doesn't mean that you have to read all of them, but just having that as an option for you if you are trying to get ahead on hours, I think it's a really nice way of making sure that you're not falling behind. The other option is you can ask your supervisor to update your running one-on-one Google Doc with permission. So on December 10th, what they write is, between the remainder of December and the end of January, you can read the following novels in order to support your students. As you make progress, please add your summaries to a note section below that is just for you to fill out. So something like that you could have. And these are just examples. They're not the only way to do it. So then you complete the activities, and then after you complete the activity, you need to write a verification piece, some sort of documentation. I chose to do this in my daily log as an example. So I had the 10 a.m. until 8 p.m., which was 10 hours. I was reading 1984. I actually finished the book, so we'll get to the encore, the adding to your timesheet after this. But in terms of my actual full description, I wrote a big summary of what I read. And this is available for you if you want to try and read what kinds of things. But essentially, just make sure that you've got enough information to really show that you've read the book and that you just like looked at Spark Notes or something, like something where it's like you have done the thing you said you've done. And your site supervisor at the end of the day is the one who's going to say that's enough information for me, or actually, because I'm verifying 10 hours of service, I would like a little bit more. Can you add some more so that I definitely know that you did the thing you said you did? Because they're having to verify that themselves, especially after you've ended service. If we reach back out, we're reaching out to them first. So just keep that in mind. And then in terms of adding to the timesheet, if you use your daily log like this, then you can have both things pretty much side by side. And so here you could see I wrote a huge thing for my written verification documentation piece, but in terms of what I add to my timesheet, all I would add is remote service, read the entirety of 1984 by George Orwell to support my Focus List students in their senior year English classes. So that's all I would write, and then I would copy paste that over once I am at the end of my timesheet, and it's time for it to be due. So to conclude this presentation, I'm just going to very quickly go through what it should look like if your site has to go fully remote. So in terms of what you are not able to do, as I said earlier, kind of anything goes. If your site is remote, anything that is part of your position description can be done remotely. It might be that your site is remote, but they have options for you to do COVID additional service hours at your site. For instance, if you were supporting food distribution, so you might do 2 hours on site every day, and then everything else that is part of your normal position description is being done remotely. That's okay. That might be your reality. So the first thing to do, and I would do this as soon as you can if you haven't already, is ask your site supervisor what are the expectations if your site goes remote. How do you support your Focus List students in a remote setting? What are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? What's expected of you? How do you support different classes? Are there COVID specific responses that you might be asked to do? If they don't have any idea, it might be that like this is an ongoing conversation for a little bit, or you get to a point where you're like, okay, well, I know that if this were to happen, my site supervisor will be able to meet with me pretty quickly to figure this out with me, and that's okay if that's what it needs to be. In terms of written pre-approval, you could ask your site supervisor to email you approval, such as, hello member, here's a list of pre-approved activities that you can complete while name of this host site is remote, starting on whatever date. So anything with emails, attending all district staff meetings, etc., etc. Then you would be completing the activities. In terms of written verification and documentation, you could be emailing your supervisor at the end of the day. I think if your whole site is remote, that's a lot of emails. So maybe this is where maybe you haven't been using the daily log, but whenever your site's going fully remote, you decide to use the daily log just because it's easier. In which case you go in and you write up that more full description. That is completely an option for you. If that's what you end up doing, you can also then write what you actually add to your timesheet. And what you add to your timesheet, again, should have fewer details than your actual written verification and documentation, like summaries. Your summaries should have more information for your site supervisor in order for them to say, yep, that checks out. But what Encore needs is more of the highlights at that point, or I don't know, a summary of a summary, which is just, it doesn't hold a lot of information, but it gives us enough information, and that's plenty for us for Encore. And that's it. So I hope that this was informative. We're going to just ask at the end of this that you tell us if you've got a remote process already in place, what your written pre-approval looks like, and what your written verification and documentation looks like. If your answer to both of those is I don't have a system in place yet, that's absolutely fine. If you have a question about your process or how to make a process, please add that instead in your follow-up to this. And I hope that you're having a lovely day. Thank you so much. Bye.